Very good. Wonderful. So we will start today's class with verse 61. Due to having surrendered all his mundane concerns, all of his Vedic duties, and even his very self to the Lord, the practitioner of bhakti no longer worries about any material loss. All right. Now, this is a very interesting verse, and it's a verse which, like several verses that are of a similar vein, can be a little bit confusing if misunderstood. So let's talk about this a little bit. Let's go through this clause by clause. So first of all, due to having surrendered all of his mundane concerns. So let's begin with this. Every human being, regardless of who they are, regardless of whether they're a materialist, regardless of whether they're a very spiritual person, everyone has mundane concerns. What are meant by mundane concerns? The everyday concerns that we all deal with. So, job, family, making ends meet, all the little things in life, all the big things in life. Everyone has to face these things. The difference being that for most materialistic people, these things are forefront on their consciousness. All that they really think about, worry about, constantly on a day-to-day basis is their job, is their possessions, their standing in society, etc. All of these mundane concerns. Now the thing is, a devotee, a person who is a spiritual person, also has to think about these things. They also have to think about making ends meet. They also have to think about their possessions, etc. But what is the difference? The difference is that they have surrendered all of these things to God. So, you see a materialistic person, you see a spiritual person. If you watch them day by day in their normal life, they seem to be doing the same thing. They get up in the morning, they get in their car, they go to work, they have their families, etc., etc. All these, many things we can talk about. But what is the difference? The difference is that with one, again, this is what they think is the meaning of their life. And there is nothing else. And they will do this and do this and do this and accumulate money and accumulate possessions, etc. Worry about their status in society, worry about so many things until the day they finally die. And then they become reincarnated. Now, the devotee, on the other hand, also does all of these things. But the gathering of material possessions and money, etc., is not forefront in their consciousness. Rather, God is forefront in their consciousness. And they have, in fact, surrendered even those material motivations, qualities, activities, etc., directly at the feet of God. So for that second individual, for a person who is a devotee, again, they're still doing these things. They have to make money, etc. But in their mind, this is seva. This is service. And not just to them and their family, not just to those who they immediately care about. It's service to God. Okay, so that's the first clause. Let's go on. Now, this part especially I'm going to have to talk about because this will be confusing to some. Due to having surrendered, okay, all his material concerns, but also all of his Vedic duties. Oh, now that's interesting. This would be very confusing to some people. Because is it not the case that we're all supposed to have our Vedic duties? We're all supposed to follow the injunctions of the Vedic scriptures very, very strictly and very sincerely. But wait a minute. Narada here seems to be saying that that person who is on the path of bhakti yoga relinquishes his attachment. Here, I'm going to state this in a way that hopefully with my stating it, you'll understand what he's saying. They are to relinquish their attachment to the practicing of their Vedic duties. Okay? Now, for those who don't get it yet, let me explain what is meant by this. Even in the following of Vedic duties, is it not the case that really there are two ways of doing this? A person can follow their Vedic duties in a truly ritualistic sort of way, where, yeah, they're following their duties. Yes, they've decided, oh yes, I'm going to be vegetarian. Oh, I'm going to go to the temple every single day. Yes, I'm going to do this ritual. I'm going to do this and do that, etc., etc. However, their motivation is not necessarily to know God, to know the highest, to truly transform themselves within spiritually, but rather, why are they following those Vedic duties? Either for the sake of following the duties in and of themselves, in other words, just blindly, or they could even be following these Vedic duties materialistically. So this is a very subtle but very important thing to understand. This is why in Vedic philosophy we see a distinction between two paths, what's called karma kanda and jnana kanda. Karma kanda means being religious and following religiosity for the sake of materialism. That is, for the sake of accumulating good karma, for the sake of looking good in the eyes of your community, for the sake of, if anything, puffing up your ego even more. How many so-called religious people do we know who are the most egotistical people on earth? Oh, look at how religious I am. Oh, look at me. Oh, there are people like this, who they're following religiosity very, very strictly, but why? It's really a form of materialism. They're not following religiosity really for the sake of knowing God, but they're doing it really for material reasons. So when Narada says this, that the devotee is to surrender following Vedic ritualism, Vedic duties in such a way, this is what he's talking about. You see, a foolish, new agey sort of individual in modernity would see this and think that what Narada is saying is, oh, okay, rules and regulations should be thrown out. Following the scriptures means nothing. Oh, we're not to follow any Vedic injunctions whatsoever. Oh, that's what Narada is saying. See, they will interpret it that way because they wish that were the case. They wish that is what Narada was saying. Is that, no, we can know God and we don't have to follow the Vedic scriptures. We don't have to follow Vedic rules and regulations and practices and customs and etiquette, etc., etc., etc. But this is not what Narada is saying. What he is saying is relinquish religiosity in a materialistic sense and follow, indeed, your Vedic duties, but do so for the right motivation, that is to know God. All right? Let's go on a little bit more. All right? And even his very self to the Lord, that is, even his very self should be surrendered to the Lord. All right. What is the Sanskrit word for this? And I'll give you a hint. It starts with a P.
Prajakati?
Close. Prapatti. Prapatti, yes. Prapatti. Self-surrender to God. Sharanagati. Atmanivedana. These are all different terms. I mean the exact same thing. And yes. Yes, that also. Yeah, there are many, many different terms for this. That is the idea of self-surrender at the feet of God. And exactly what those words mean. Self-surrender, surrender of oneself. Not merely surrender of one's possessions. Not merely surrender of one's intelligence. Think about this. Not merely surrender of one's fill in the blank. Not simply surrendering things that are outside of yourself. You see, envision the multi-billionaire who supposedly wants to know God and goes to a temple and there is an image of Krishna or Narayana, and he comes and he somehow manages to bring his wealth with him, and he takes the wealth and he places it at the feet of the Murti, and he says, this is all yours now. That is not what Narada is speaking about. That's inferior. Rather, what self-surrender, prapatti, truly means is that even if the person has no wealth, even if the person is a billionaire, even if the person is just middle class, the way that we know God is not by simply surrendering those things which are secondary anyway, that which we have, but rather that which we are, is what we are to surrender. Surrender, quite literally, of self. Because possessions, any possession, even deeper possessions like our intelligence, for example, or our physical strength or whatever, possessions that are very close to us, those are all secondary. They come and go. What to speak of wealth, what to speak of tertiary sort of possessions that we will have. Those things come and go. They have nothing to do with us anyway. then what to speak of those secondary possessions that we have? Again, body, mind, intelligence, etc. We are none of those things. But rather, what we are called upon to do is to go to the very root of not what we have, but of who we are, and to surrender that thoroughly at the feet of God. A process which, when you hear it, it can be explained in one sentence. Self-surrender to the Absolute. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? And yet, again, for that billionaire, it would be easier for that person to give every penny that he has to God than to give his own self to God. It's the most difficult thing in the world, to surrender truly one's self to God. But this is the process. Prapatti, self-surrender. All right. So, due to having surrendered all these things, that is, mundane concerns, Vedic duties, even his very self to the Lord, the practitioner of bhakti no longer worries about any material loss. About any material loss. When we think about it, for the vast majority of individuals, and the vast majority of individuals, that is at the center of their psyche, is this fear of loss. They may even put on a good show and pretend that, well, I'm not materialistic, I don't care about these things. Still, even if they're not really worried about losing, let's say, their money or their house, they're worried about losing their reputation. They're worried about losing their body. They're worried about losing so many things that may be, if not gross and physical and something you can actually hold in your hand, it's still something that is subtle and there nonetheless. Like in Japanese culture, different East Asian cultures, they talk about losing face. You know, we've all heard this before, about how, the worst loss that you can have is to lose face in front of others. Well, what does that mean? Can you see that? Can you weigh that? You can't, but yet it's something that's there nonetheless. So very, very interesting. We all fear losing things, subtle and tangible. A devotee is a person who comes to the point where, because they have surrendered all, they worry about the loss of nothing. They quite literally are people who have nothing to lose. Thus they are free. Thus they are free. So, let's go on now to the next verse, which is 62. And this is a somewhat longer verse, so everyone just read along with me. Even upon achieving perfect devotional consciousness, one must not relinquish one's worldly responsibilities, but should surrender the fruits of one's worldly activities to God. All such prescribed Vedic duties, now listen to this last sentence very carefully, all such prescribed Vedic duties must be continued while practicing bhakti. Okay? Now you see why I emphasize that everyone should especially listen to that last verse. See, does this not share light on the previous verse that we just looked at, where Narada says, you should give up, you should relinquish, you should surrender all prescribed duties. But now Narada makes it very clear what he's saying. No, you have to follow those prescribed duties even as you're practicing bhakti. So again, confirming what we said, that yes, what you give up is religious materialism. What you give up is the idea of being quote-unquote religious, but again, for material reasons, to show off, to just give yourself a little psychological comfort, etc. But if you are practicing bhakti, in other words, if you are practicing spirituality truly as a result of correct motivation, that is, you want to know God, you want to surrender yourself, then what does Narada say? No, you make sure you follow the Vedic duties perfectly. Okay? But we're jumping ahead of ourselves a little bit. Let's go and look at the rest of the verse from the beginning. So, even upon achieving, this is important, even upon achieving perfect devotional consciousness. So in other words, not simply being on the path. What Narada here is saying is, even if you have achieved the goal, and you have achieved perfect devotional consciousness. One must not relinquish one's worldly responsibilities. Let's stop there. So again, the somewhat immature neophyte way of understanding, that is the idea that, oh, what does it mean to be a spiritual person? Oh, I have no duties anymore. I have nothing to do in this material world anymore. So what does it mean? I can pretend to be a spiritual person while in actuality being the equivalent of essentially a nomadic Hindu hippie. That is, oh yeah, I'll look like a yogi. Yeah, maybe I'll even wear a bindi and I'll do a little bit of yoga, speak the right words that sound right, etc. But I'm going to be a bum. I'm not going to have a job. I'm not going to do all the things that are necessary in this world. Pay my taxes, pay my bills, worry about doing laundry, etc. This is a very neophyte idea that many people have. People have this idea in India and in the West, that what it means to be spiritual is that I'm going to give up on life. That is not what it means to be spiritual. On the contrary, being spiritual is embracing life in all of its aspects, and that includes also taking care of yourself within the world. So this is a reason why people who have known me for years know that I emphasize this again and again and again. You can be so thoroughly, radically, transcendentally spiritual to the point where you indeed no longer even feel as if you are a part of this world anymore internally, but at the same time function in this world perfectly. To the point where anyone observing you externally wouldn't even necessarily know. They would just see you as another person on the job, co-worker. They would notice that, well, this person seems to be doing a truly excellent job, which is amazing. If anything, you'll amaze them with how hard you work. If anything, you'll amaze them with the dedication with which you will do your material duties. People will be amazed at your discipline. People will be amazed at your fortitude. People will be amazed at your inner strength. And yet internally, you've transcended it all, even though you're doing it perfectly. See, that's the amazing thing. That is the perfect yogi. Someone who has thoroughly transcended the world and yet who is operating perfectly within the world. That's why, what is the pure enlightened being? A lotus flower. You've heard me say this a million times, and I'm not the only one. Many people have said this. The lotus flower is rooted in the murky waters. It's literally rooted there, but yet it grows and it raises itself above those waters, and it shows its beauty to the entire world. This is what we are meant to be, like those lotus flowers. Rooted in the world, doing everything that we need to materially, but at the same time, inwardly, having transcended it all. It's not one or the other. It's not one or the other. And someone who feels it is one or the other is a neophyte, is a beginner, barely a beginner. In time, they'll learn that no, you can have it both. You can have a car, you can have a nice place to live. Nothing, need something extravagant, but comfortable. You can have a comfortable living, etc., etc. And at the same time, know that your destiny is that at the end of this lifetime, you will achieve liberation. You can have it both. So, let's look at this verse a little bit more. But should surrender the fruits of one's worldly activities to God. See, there is the clue right there. That's the most important part of this verse right here, is that this is how we do this. This is how we negotiate this fine line, but we negotiate it perfectly, of being completely spiritual people while also being completely successful within the world. How do we do that? Because of what this just said. But that person should surrender the fruits of one's worldly activities to God. Do your worldly activities. Make $1 million, please. Make $1 million, get a PhD, do all these wonderful things. Take yourself materially as far as you can. Be an example to others, be an inspiration to others. But inwardly, surrender it all to God. And again, what does that mean? It doesn't mean literally you go to a temple and you take every last penny that you have and you leave it at the feet of the Murti. No, no, no. You take care of yourself. You have everything that you need. Again, all the comforts that you need. But inwardly, you understand that it belongs to God. But then also practically, yes, take some of your money and give it to God. Give it to ISDS, give it to a temple, give it to something in which you are now personally surrendering a part of what you have to God. This is how it is done. And then finally, the last verse, which again, I'll just read one more time because it's important. All such prescribed duties must be continued while practicing bhakti. Again, explaining that little clause in the previous verse. No, it's not a nomadic hippie free-for-all. Let me just throw away all rules and regulations. It's all meaningless. Let me throw away spirituality. Let me throw away gurus. Who are you to tell me anything? No, no, no. If you are sincere, you will follow spirituality perfectly. If you are not sincere, you can cover every wall of your home with posters of Krishna and Ganapati and Saraswati and Lakshmi, and everything you're doing is worthless. If you're not sincere, it's just show. All right. Let's go on, please, to 63. One should not focus one's attention upon descriptions of eroticism, the acquisition of wealth, or atheistic philosophies. Very good. Well, this is somewhat self-explanatory still. Let me comment on this a little bit. This is, of course, an injunction for an individual who, again, is sincere, who truly wants to know themselves, who truly wants to know God, who truly wants to practice yoga spirituality, both philosophically but sadhana-wise as well, in a sincere way in which they will finally achieve the goal. This is who we're talking about, first of all. Now, understanding that person, such a person, should not focus their attention upon descriptions of eroticism. Now, again, that's self-explanatory. That's self-explanatory. When it comes to sexuality, when it comes to eroticism, when it comes to anything of this, let's say, within this field, Vedic spirituality is not some sort of puritanistic cult. We understand the need at certain points in one's life for celibacy. We understand the need for constraint, etc. At the same time, it's understood that if a person is married, if a person is in a healthy relationship, then sex life is there and it should be enjoyed thoroughly. That's why there is an actual scripture, an actual sutra called the Kama Sutra that talks about this. But again, within its proper context. Of course, what do we have today? The vast, vast, vast majority of the expression of eroticism is not in its proper context. Rather, it's in the form of what? What do we have now? Something called the internet. And what's the number one thing on the internet? Those who know the internet, please answer. What is looked up more than anything on the internet? What websites exist for this particular thing? Pornography. Yeah, pornography. This is what we're talking about. Of course, back when Narada wrote this, there was no internet. There was nothing like this. But this is essentially what Narada is saying. He's not asking for a type of puritanistic attitude on the part of individuals. Rather, what he's saying is, like with all things, have everything in a balanced way and within its proper context. So when it comes to the idea of, rather than focusing our awareness on God, we are focusing our awareness on illusion, because that's what pornography is. It's fantasy, it's illusion, it's things that are not real, but yet are absorbing the mind, absorbing our awareness. What we are to do is, instead of allowing our awareness to be absorbed on something that is not even real, absorb it in the divine instead. And in this way, we will know happiness. So that's the first thing. Second thing, one should not focus one's attention upon the acquisition of wealth. Again, a person who is a neophyte will misunderstand this. And, oh, what does this mean? Oh, so wait a minute. Narada here is saying, oh, we shouldn't accumulate any money. No. We should all be in poverty. No. Do not focus your attention, your awareness on this. In other words, don't make the acquisition of wealth the one thing that you're focused on in life. That's all. No, again, acquire wealth, acquire all the goods and services and necessities that you need to survive and be happy in life. And in fact, even have excess, but then give that to God. But don't let this be the only reason why you exist, is just to accumulate wealth, etc. All right, very good. All right, and one should not focus one's attention upon descriptions of the last thing, atheistic philosophies. Atheistic philosophies. So, in other words, what does this mean? Is Narada calling for a form of censorship? Is this what Narada is saying? That, okay, well, wait a minute, here's a professor, you're in college, here's a professor, and he's presenting something from, let's say, an atheistic perspective, a Marxist perspective, or whatever sort of atheistic perspective that is there. Oh, what does this mean? I should throw my hands over my ears and run away. No, it's not what we're talking about. It's not what Narada is speaking about. Rather, again, we're talking about the absorption of consciousness, of awareness on things. We should not allow our consciousness to be absorbed in eroticism, to be absorbed in the acquisition of wealth, to be absorbed in atheistic philosophies. And why? Why is this the case? So you see, again, actually, to back up, we're not talking about, when he talks about atheistic philosophies, we're not even talking about trying to understand atheistic philosophies as an intellectual pursuit. It's not what he's talking about. Rather, what he's talking about is the absorption of one's consciousness upon atheistic philosophies. And why is this the case? That we should not allow such materialistic atheistic philosophies to be, again, forefront in our consciousness. The reason why, very simply, is because we won't be happy. Atheistic philosophies of any kind whatsoever necessarily are nihilistic in nature. And it doesn't matter what the atheistic philosophy is. Again, it can be just pure atheism, it can be skepticism, it can be Marxism, it can actually be Buddhism. Any atheistic philosophy leads to nihilism. And for those who don't understand what nihilism is, I'm sure everyone has heard that term. Nihilism means essentially the philosophy that the ultimate conclusion that I will come to is that there is nothingness. There is no meaning. That there's no meaning to me, there's no meaning to my life, there's no meaning to this world, and that if I could even posit that there is indeed an absolute, that absolute is zero, is nothingness. That's nihilism. All atheistic philosophies, regardless of what that atheistic philosophy is, leads to nihilism. Why is this the case? Because everything of meaning is taken away from us. If we believe that quite literally all that exists is matter, that's atheism. See, a lot of people, when they hear the word atheism, they think it simply means disbelief in God. No, it doesn't mean simply that. Atheism means also the acceptance that all that there is materiality. All right? Now, if all that there is materiality, what's wrong with this? If all I am is this body, and even my mind is just an outgrowth of the physical body, all right? Why do anything? Why live? Why be good? Why speculate about the meaning of life? There is no meaning of life. I'm just this body. I came into being. One day I'll die. The whole earth will forget I ever even existed. You see? If all that we are is the body, then it means that the ultimate truth is that there is nothingness. There is no meaning. It leads to nihilism. Okay? So again, we're talking about this not just intellectually, but as far as absorption of consciousness. If we allow our consciousness to absorb atheistic philosophies, we become nihilists. Our lives lose meaning. Does this make sense? All right. Let's go on to 64. All false pride, hypocrisy, and similar vices should be renounced. Again, somewhat self-explanatory, but still, I'll comment on this a little bit. So first of all false pride. All false pride. All right. Now, You are contemplating the history of Vedic culture. You are contemplating Vedic aesthetics. And you are, let's say, looking at a book and you're seeing these images of beautiful ancient Vedic temples that are massive, that are covered with the most beautiful artwork, where they were constructed in such a way that even the best architects, the best engineers of today can barely even figure out how did they do something so magnificent. And within you, as a follower of Sanatana Dharma, as you're looking at this and reading these descriptions, this sense of pride comes over you. Oh my Lord, this is my tradition. This is Vedic culture. And you have this pride. Is that bad? No, it's not. This is a healthy pride. It's a healthy pride. It's a pride that is based on something real. It's based on spirituality, in fact. See, by being proud of Vedic culture, you're being proud of the eternal. Indirectly, you're being proud, let's say, of God. That's a good pride. That's a good pride. Or let's say you accomplish something truly magnificent in life. You know, you go to college and you finally graduate, or something like this. And you have a healthy sense of pride that, wow, I worked so hard. I did this for 4 years, 5 years, and so many nights I had to just spend staying up, studying and taking so many exams, and now finally I'm finished. And you have a little bit of pride in yourself. Is that bad? No? That's healthy self-pride. It's healthy self-pride. But let's say you are the sort of individual who you've made an enormous error in your life. And in fact, it hurts someone. And everyone knows this. And they have even begun to chastise you about it. But you refuse to admit it. Even though really you know it's true. You refuse to admit that you did it. And you just kind of throw your hands over your ears, and you refuse to hear people's criticism of you, and you refuse to make amends, and you refuse to apologize, etc. You just have this pride in yourself that won't allow you to do the right thing. Is that a healthy pride? Of course not. Of course not. So we see that when it comes to being proud, there's also distinction. You can be proud in a healthy way, or you can have what is spoken of here, a false pride, a pride based upon illusion. For any individual who wishes to be a true spiritual practitioner, this false pride has to be renounced. Again, not a healthy self-pride because you've actually accomplished something. That's different. If you actually worked hard for 10 years and you accomplished something, whatever it is, for 10 years you worked really hard struggling with a business, and then finally it's successful, or again you get a degree or something, well, you have a right to be proud. You have a right to be proud. But if you have a false sort of pride that's based upon illusion that harms others and harms yourself, that has to be renounced. All right? Hypocrisy. Hypocrisy. We all know what hypocrisy is, but still, we'll talk about this for a moment. What is hypocrisy? Essentially, saying one thing, doing the other. This is hypocrisy. There can be no such thing as hypocrisy in the life of any spiritual individual. If you are a person who is a yogi, you have to be a yogi. If you're a person who claims to be vegetarian, you must be a vegetarian, etc. You can't have the sort of hypocrisy where you expect everyone around you to do A, but then you don't do A. Instead, you do B. You do the very opposite. This is something that most people have been guilty of. For an individual who wishes to be spiritual, you can't be hypocritical. Because hypocrisy is the opposite of sincerity. And we are meant to be sincere. All right. And then similar vices should be renounced. Narada doesn't go into depth about what those similar vices are. Let's go on to 65. Yes, let's go on to 65. Having offered all of one's actions to God, all such feelings of desire, anger, pride, and so on should be expressed only in relation to God. All right. Now, this is an interesting verse, isn't it? This is an interesting verse. Let me just read this one more time. Having offered all of one's actions to God. All right. So this is, again, in the mode of prapatti. All such feelings of desire, anger, pride, and so on should be expressed only in relation to God. So again, let's focus, first of all, let's go kind of to the middle of this sentence. Let's focus on these various feelings of desire, anger, pride, adi. He says adi, and so on. Adi means etc. Okay? Now, as I think we have begun to see, these various modes of emotion, of feeling, these desiderative modes, one could say, can be either good or bad. Again, just dealing with pride, we just talked about that. One could be proud in a way that's self-destructive or proud in a healthy way. Well, that is also the same with these others as well. Desire, indeed, even anger, actually. But let's talk about this. So, having surrendered oneself, all of these various modes of feeling can indeed be dovetailed through bhakti, through devotion, in such a way that we can still have them, experience them, and express them, but we're doing so in the service of God. So let's deal with each one of these. First of all, desire. Desire. Again, spiritual neophytes, people who don't quite understand spirituality fully, will sometimes make the mistake of thinking that, oh, desire itself is something that is bad. Desire itself is something that is bad. Now, here's a nice little piece of logic for you. If desire itself is an evil, then the desire to not have desire is itself an evil. You see how it falls apart then? If desire itself is evil, then if I say, well, I desire to not have desire, then I'm expressing an evil, to get rid of an evil. So you see how there's a contradiction that's there. It doesn't work. So desire itself is not something that is evil. Rather, of course, desire wrongly motivated for the wrong thing in illusion is something that will harm us. But, of course, if we desire something that is wonderful, that is good, then that's a good desire. So again, if I say that, oh, my desire is to not have artificial desires, my desire is not to have illusioned desires, well, that's a good desire. If I say, my desire is to know my true self, sincerely so, to know Atman, that's a good desire. My desire is to surrender to God. See, we've seen this again and again. Prapatti, prapatti, surrender to God, surrender to God. How do you surrender to God without the desire to surrender to God? Of necessity, you have to have the desire to surrender to God, to surrender to God. Okay? So this is how desire can be dovetailed. Now, this is the one that gets to people sometimes. Anger. Anger. Can anger actually be transcendentalized? Some people will say no, some people will say yes. And it's interesting how I've had this discussion with quite a few people, and especially people who either they were in Vedic spirituality but they didn't quite understand it, or people who were in, let's say, allied dharmic traditions, especially martial arts. You know, there are practitioners of Zen, for example, who have the idea that, oh yes, we are meant to engage in martial arts, but emotionless. And the truth is, there is some philosophical validity to saying this. However, even further, if by using anger, but using anger in a detached manner, we can gain extra strength in the fight that we have ahead of us, would that not be better?
Anger is an energy.
Exactly, exactly. Now, you have to listen always to my words very carefully. Using anger itself in a detached manner in our fight. Can a person use anger in a detached way? The answer is yes. And in fact, we have hundreds of examples from the Vedic scriptures, and not just the Vedic scriptures. We have some such examples even from the life of Prabhupada, the life of many gurus, where they will suddenly, seemingly be angry at a person in order to teach them something. They'll suddenly be angry at a person in order to get them to do something that they're not doing. And then the next second, that anger is gone. People would note this about Prabhupada all the time. Sometimes he would seemingly get frustrated at a disciple or a group of disciples who just can't get something right. And he'll get suddenly very angry at them, almost to the point of yelling at them. What's wrong with you? You're an idiot. You shouldn't be doing that. And then, literally, the next second, he's fine. And he'll have a philosophical conversation with someone. In other words, he used anger. The anger, however, was not a part of him. He used anger in a detached way. Because right then, those disciples, that's what they needed. That was all they could understand. That's the mystery of the Guru. That's the mystery of the Guru. Yeah, I've known people who witnessed Prabhupada do this once in a while, where seemingly he would be angry at someone, but then it would amaze people that, you see, when a normal person becomes angry, it's an emotion. So when they're angry with someone, even when that situation is over, the anger takes a little time to go away. But not with a pure devotee. Again, the anger is not a part of them. They're just using it as a tool, in the same way that they would use anything as a tool. The same is true for Kshatriyas as well. Kshatriyas would use their anger to give themselves some added strength, some added energy, so they could defeat their enemy. The moment their enemy was defeated, the anger is gone. It was just a tool. Okay? Dharmaraja, did you have a question?
Yes, I was wondering, when Arjuna was in the Bhagavad Gita, when he was fighting his enemies, did he undoubtedly practiced anger in that fashion so that it could be effective as a warrior?
Yes. Yes, exactly. These are the three, let's say, stages of fighting in Arjuna's life. First, he hears the Bhagavad Gita. He learns about absolute detachment. Second, he engages in the battle. He engages in this battle that goes on for days and days and days. And there are instances in the Mahabharata where, yes, he was angry. He and the other Pandavas used anger. And then the third stage, the battle was over. They are themselves again personifications of Dharma. So yes, Arjuna and the other Pandavas used anger as a tool. They used ferocity as a tool because they were warriors. So again, all of this can be used, but only if it is dovetailed. Pride. Yeah, the last thing is pride, and we already talked about that. Obviously, we can use pride in a spiritual and a positive way, in addition to it being used in a negative way. So we won't go much deeper into that. Why don't we stop here for now? I'm thinking let's stop at 66, because now a new theme begins. All right, so now, are there any questions about anything we covered? Yes?
Yes. Surrendering oneself to the Lord sounds wonderful, but it's a little bit vague in my mind. How a person feels, or psychologically, can you elaborate on it a little bit? What sort of thoughts go through their mind as they're being surrendered, or if there are any thoughts? But psychologically, what does it mean?
This is actually a very important question, and exactly the way you stated it. Yes, psychologically, what does it look like for an individual to engage in prapatti, to engage in surrender to God? Because truthfully, yes, we do know what it looks like psychologically. First of all, for an individual to come to the point of wanting to surrender to God, at that point, the person's material life has come to its tail end. That's number one. At that point, the person, for one reason or another, has had enough negative experiences within this world, has had enough pain, has had enough suffering, has had enough trauma in this world, negatively speaking, such that he understands that this world is not a place of happiness for him. a place of ultimate happiness. That is not ultimately his true home. But then positively, the person also has this corresponding desire and yearning for the opposite of what I just said. That is, they want their true home. They want to experience happiness. They want to experience joy. They want to experience fullness within them and wholeness. So there's that negative and that positive. The person, first of all, has to have come to that point in time, in their life, where they're ready for their suffering to end and they're ready for true joy to begin, in other words. At that point, also, what then becomes necessary psychologically is what Soren Kierkegaard, calls indeed that leap of faith. Prapatti ultimately is a leap of faith. It's the ultimate leap of faith, in which, all right, now with these preconditions that we spoke about, the person has experienced enough suffering in this world, they want it to end. They know that, even just intuitively, they know that there is true happiness somewhere that they are meant to experience. Now, what to do? At this point, there is a chasm that is infinite in its length, and one must leap over this chasm. This is why it's called a leap of faith, what Kierkegaard calls a leap of faith. You now see yourself basically standing on this precipice, where behind you is everything that you've known. But what have you known? Suffering, misery, pain, loss, disappointment, etc. And even though your eyes cannot see it, you know that on the other side of this seemingly infinite chasm is what your heart is truly searching for. That is joy, happiness, truth, reality. And you know that there's no bridge. You know that there's no person with wings who's going to just kind of grab you and fly you to the other side. You know that ultimately you need to make a leap that is the biggest leap you've ever made in your life, the biggest leap you can conceive of. And you know that if you make that leap with enough effort, you will make it to the other side. You know that. But at the same time, you look down at that chasm and you start to think, but what if I don't make it? But you know you'll make it. But what if I don't make it? Now psychologically comes that confliction that is there. This is where faith comes in. The deeper aspect of yourself knows that on the other side you know what's there. And you also know you can make it if you leap with enough effort and enough devotion. But then there's that little voice that it's also telling you, but look down there, what if I don't? But I know I can, but what if I don't? Now comes prapatti. It's at this point that prapatti proper comes into play. What do? You focus all of your attentive energy upon only one thing. You see, this is the whole process. This is sadhana itself. What is sadhana? You focus all of your attentive awareness upon the goal, and you push forward toward that goal no matter what. Is that not sadhana? That's sadhana. But now, in the context of prapatti, there is that goal, that spiritual land that is there. And in order to make it, in order to make that leap of faith, you focus all of your attentive awareness on that and that alone. That chasm does not even exist. You tell yourself it does not exist, and as a result, it doesn't exist. The reason why? Because in actuality, it never actually existed. The chasm is an illusion. And you gather yourself unto yourself with every internal power and energy that you have within you, and you make that leap with joy. That is the process of prapatti, that in itself. Having landed on the other side, that's the result of prapatti. But the leap itself, that is prapatti.
Do you feel like you're going to kill yourself that the fear is that you're going to lose control of everything that defined you before, and it's like killing yourself.
That's the chasm. That's the illusion. Yeah.
Make it fear.
It's fear. That is the chasm. The chasm is, yeah. What is the opposite of prapatti? Really, it's fear. Why do we not surrender? We could say, oh, well, it's illusion, it's ignorance, it's maya, avidya, this, that, the other. Yeah, that's true. But ultimately, you're right. It's fear. Fear of loss of self, of course, the artificial self. On the contrary, when we do prapatti, we gain our true self. But yeah, it's ultimately this fear that keeps us from doing this. So this is why Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, surrender unto me and ma shuchaha, do not fear. Do not fear. Yeah. So it's the ultimate leap of faith. When you, even in this world, let's say, oh, you're doing some sort of rock climbing or something, and you have to jump from one ledge to the other. What keeps you from doing it? Fear. You lose that fear, and if you're good enough a climber and you have skills and you know what you're doing, and logically you know, no, I can make this. I've done bigger leaps before. You overcome that fear, you make the leap, you're fine. Yeah, but it's the fear itself that keeps us from making that leap. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else?
So does the person try to establish some sort of connection with consciousness? He says, I am consciousness, I am one with consciousness, nothing can harm me, I'm really safe.
Prapatti is actually an advanced practice. It's an advanced practice. So the truth of the matter is, by the time a person is ready for prapatti, at that point, they know they are consciousness. At that point, they are already extremely comfortable with atmajnana, with knowledge of their true self as consciousness. Because, why would you even want to perform prapatti? Why would you want to surrender to that which is the source of your consciousness without even knowing that you're consciousness? See, that's why, again, as I stress again and again, and to this day, it's sad to me that to my knowledge, I am literally the only guru upon the earth who stresses this, that it's a two-tiered process. First self-realization, then God consciousness. No one here, probably, I can guess, no one here has ever heard any other guru anywhere on YouTube or whatever say this. And I've said this for decades and decades and decades. And it's logical. First, you must know the knower before you can know the object of knowledge. Very simple. It's a very logical, sequential sort of action. First, I must know myself before I can know that which is the source of myself. How can I know the greater without knowing the lesser? I'm going to just skip over the lesser and know the greatest thing of all? Of course not. First, you know you. First, you have that atmajnana. First, you have full understanding of yourself in your true self as consciousness, as Atman. Then from there, you can have Brahma Vidya. Then you have God consciousness. You want to climb a ladder. Do you jump to the 10th rung, or do you begin with the first rung? You begin with the first, then the second, and on and on. In the same way, first we begin by knowing ourselves. Then we go to the highest. So that's the process. That's the process. And that's why everyone in every real spiritual tradition knows, first, know thyself. First of all, know thyself. And then from there, you can know the absolute. That it starts with first atmajnana, knowing oneself, then knowing God, not the other way around. Knowing God is the highest. Knowing God, at that point, all spirituality has reached its culmination. So how can you say, okay, I have done that through which all spirituality has reached its culmination, but I'm still ignorant about who I am? It's not possible. It's kind of like, well, yes, I earned my PhD, but I never graduated from second grade. How was that possible? No. First you graduate second grade, et cetera, then you get your PhD.
I beat up
Because he was an Advaitin. He was an Advaitin. That's what they all do. Self is God, God is self, I am God, you are God, we're all God. Mm-hmm. That's the problem. That's why Advaita doesn't work. That's why Advaita does not work. When it comes to anything of importance, we want precision, not blurriness, correct? You're an engineer, you're a doctor, you're in physics, you're in any field that is scientific, that is philosophical, where you're dealing with important subject matters. You want precision, not blurriness. Well, whatever you think, it's all kind of the same. And well, this word means that word, and that word means this word. And yes, it could be absolute truth, or it could be an ice cream cone. Or no, you don't want blurriness. You want precision, absolute precision. Like you're doing brain surgery, not, oh yes, this person has such and such a problem. Let me try throwing a cup of Drano in there. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, no. You don't just have this blurriness of thought. No, if you are a brain surgeon, you want absolute precision, and you've studied this for decades, and you know what you're doing, and you did all your research beforehand, and you did your x-rays, and you did your MRIs, and et cetera, et cetera. You know this person's history. You don't just, there's some person with his head open here. Let me try a hammer. Absolute precision. Well, this is true philosophically as well. You don't just speculate. You don't just say, oh, yes, it's all the same. Doesn't matter what you say. As soon as an individual is dealing with something important and they say X doesn't matter, that's someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. Oh, it doesn't matter that such and such. No, it does matter. You're talking about God, it matters. Never say, oh, it doesn't matter what you believe about such. No, it does matter. It all matters. You're dealing with God. You see, look at genetics. How intricate are genetics? How sophisticated are genetics? This is how God encodes everything alive within this universe in such a way that everything looks and is precisely what it is and how it looks. And that's nothing. We see that God uses perfect precision, but yet we wish to know God and we don't need to use precision to know that being who uses a precision so perfect that nothing can match it. No, we need to be as precise as possible. No fluffiness. Otherwise, we're playing games. We're not sincere.